For those of you who are watching who have seen a lot of videos regarding pickup, dating, that kind of stuff, when you hear this idea of premise, you might be like, hey Todd, that's just showing intent, right? Aren't you just talking about showing intent? And at a very beginner level, a lot of the ways that you will establish premise do look a lot like showing intent. So that is accurate at a very fundamental, basic beginner level. However, at intermediate and advanced levels, they become dramatically different. So the idea of showing intent is essentially showing interest. Letting the girl know, hey, I'm interested in you, I would like to date you, I would like to fuck you, I'd like to have a relationship with you, something like that, okay? The idea of intent is showing that there is a possibility that something man to woman might happen. Now, that seems a lot the same, but there is a subtle distinction, and here's kind of where the distinction comes in. It's the difference between having a job interview and being offered a job, right? So if you know going into a company that you're being interviewed for a particular job, you know what the expectations of you are, you know what the credentials potentially are, you know what types of things you want to say to this person, you know how to try to impress them and how to try and win them over. And you're going to have a motivation to do so. If on the other hand, you came in and instead of giving an interview, they're just like, you know what, you're the only person that applied, we're just going to give you the job, right? Now, you're going to act very differently in that scenario. Number one, if you know you have the job, when it comes time to negotiate salary, you're probably going to negotiate really fucking hard because you know you're their only option, right? You know that you basically have them by the balls and you can get away with whatever you want, right? You also probably will value the job less. You won't consider it as cool of a job as you would have if there had actually been a process you went through and if you actually had to interview for the job. In fact, you might actually get suspicious. You might be like, wait, why was this so easy? Why did you just give me the job? You might not say that to them, but you might be thinking it. And you might be thinking, there's something shady about this organization. I'm not sure if I agree with this. You might not even take the job. Maybe you wanted the job going in. Because it was just offered to you too easily, you might actually say no to it, okay? So there is a very big difference between getting offered a job interview and getting offered a job. And that's really the same as the difference between intent and premise. So premise is basically saying there is a job that exists and you are being potentially considered for it versus, hey, you got a job, okay? And what this does in game, we'll get back to the idea of directly intent and premise. When you're directly showing interest in the girl, you're putting her on a higher value level than you. You're saying, I want something from you, I'm needy, you have something I want, you can kind of get away with what you want. You can treat me like shit a little bit. I'll bend over backwards for you. And this establishes a lot of negative frames for a relationship if it does go on to happen. But even before the relationship happens, it establishes a lot of negatives for the interaction you're going to have. It gives her permission to give you a lot of shit. It gives her permission to be very difficult. It gives her permission to be very demanding. And it gives her a lot of incentives to reject you. It also puts you in a frame, in a position where a lot of the actions you're going to have to take to be congruent with that position are actually lower value actions, right? If you've already put her on a pedestal through your own actions, you now need to operate in a world where she's on a pedestal. And that's going to create a lot of very compromising, very low value behaviors for you, okay? So this idea of intent it's useful, again, at a beginner level. And actually, for a beginner, I'm totally fine with you going up and saying, hey, I like you, I want to meet you. I think that's actually completely fine. We talked in the previous section about what openers a beginner should use, and they are openers that do show some intent, openers that are fairly direct. Because at that level, it's fine, because whatever damage you're doing to your game, whatever leveling you're doing to yourself, you're probably already leveling yourself at that level or lower through the rest of your actions, so you're not really giving up much. And establishing the premise has a there's a very strong incentive to do it. It's a very powerful, useful thing. So whatever you have to do to establish that premise, just go ahead and do it. However, at an intermediate or advanced level, once you do have the skill set to develop attraction on your own, once you have the ability to bring up premise at any point in the conversation, once you've learned kind of different ways to establish premise, which we're going to talk about in the follow-up videos to this one, the ones coming right after this, we're going to talk about ways to show premise that don't give your power away quite so much. Once you've learned those things, you have a much better alternative. And obviously, when you have the better alternative, you want to use it. Okay, so understand there is a difference between premise and intent. They're not the same thing. They do seem similar, and there is a similarity for sure, right? I would say if you're looking at like a Venn diagram, like of all the premiseful things that you can do, intent is a little subsection within that, right? So showing intent is one subsection of all the ways to show premise or to establish premise, but it's not the entire thing, and it's not even the most useful of the subsections. So it is one way. It's sort of like a crutch. It's a very easy, very direct, straightforward way to show, to establish a premise. And again, as a beginner, it's totally fine. But once you get to that intermediate advanced level, I really want you to think in terms of premise being different than intent, and that there are many, many, many ways to establish premise, some of which don't give any of your power away, some of which actually put you on a higher value frame, and some of which actually get the girl to have to like prove herself to you, right? So just understand this distinction. We'll get a lot more into it. It's going to make a lot more sense as we go through the next modules, but I do want to call this out right now because a lot of you, when hearing about premise, you're like, oh, Todd, you just took intent and rephrased it in a different way. No, no, no. Premise is this big category. Intent is a small little subcategory of premise. Showing intent is one way to establish premise, but it's only one of many, many different ways, and it's far from the most effective.